everybody. I'm Paul Thurrott, and I'm here today with Gaurav Seth, the project leader for .NET, C++, and developer platforms and tools at Microsoft. I hope I got that right.
Yes. Hey, Paul. Great to be here with you. Thanks for having me over.
Yeah, so we're here at Microsoft Ignite 2023, which is happening concurrently with .NET Conf. I know you headlined basically the .NET Conf virtual show, which was fantastic. So I got to watch a bunch of that. And have you had any work over here as well at the convention center? Or?
So I have not had any work over here, but I think, of course, members of the team were over here, like across the 3 days, talking about the various things that we have, kind of launched in the platform with the .NET 8 release. So we were covering a bunch of those, as well as, a bunch of the tooling enhancements with, some of the new things that we've launched this year with the C# dev kit, the Maui dev kit, and the Unity dev kit built on top of that. So
right, nice. Yeah, I wish, I love .NET Conf, by the way, and I love the whole, it's got kind of a homey, folksy feel to it, and I wish in a way you guys could be here just so people could kind of interact.
That is true. That is true. It's always like, one of the pieces I always miss is like that in-person aspect of those conferences. Like, when you are in a virtual conference, there's always like, at the end of the day, you're talking to a microphone and to a camera, but, you would so much want to see the energy from people. But it's also a very intricate balance, especially this year with Ignite happening and .NET Conf happening. We were like, hey, let's not try to have a hybrid event, which is farther away, and then, you kind of miss out on the whole thing. But you're absolutely right. Like, being here would have been phenomenal.
I mean, I almost want it for you guys.
Yeah, I know. I know.
It's clear watching the show that it's like a family almost.
Absolutely.
It's got a really fun vibe, which honestly, you don't get a lot at an event this big or this type. So
that's true.
You don't want to lose that part.
Yeah, and it's like, we want to keep it that way, because I think when I think about developers, right, like the thing that always kind of attracts me the most is the humility with which you got to approach the topic, right? And I think in the conference, that's one of the core pieces that we try to, bring as well. It's not well rehearsed. It's not like, hey, we've, done so much in our slide decks that you will find them to be 100% polished. Mistakes happen, demos will fail, and it's okay, because, we ourselves are also developers, and I think that's the best way to connect to the audience, whom we all love to work for.
Yeah, I saw that in the video. There were a couple little, someone wasn't sure the camera was on them, or they were looking the wrong way and everything. And I think it's human, and it just makes it warmer, and I think it's nice.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. So we jumped right ahead to .NET Conf. I got so excited there, but we should talk a little bit about you too. So
sure.
I apologize.
Sure.
So maybe you could tell us about yourself and what how you came to be where you are today.
Yeah, Paul, that's a very interesting story. So I, started my journey as a software engineer. I was working, as on a radio access network, working on the networking stack all the way from layer 2 to layer 7. And then, about three years in, I hit a point where I was literally debugging bit streams in my sleep. And I was like, that is getting too much, because, I think working as a networking engineer, you're always trying to see like, hey, where the error actually occurred. But it was a phenomenal journey. Post that, I think I saw an opening where it was like, all right, Microsoft is hiring for something called product management. That sounds very interesting and intriguing, and I want to go try it out.
When was this?
This was back in 2003.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, this let me go give it a try. I want to learn more about this space. And I was like, I'm having fun at the place I am in. But then, the whole thing happened. The offer came in. I was like, okay, I will go in and try it for a couple of years and see like whether it works or not. And I'm here 20 plus years, on a 2-year plan. The journey at Microsoft has been very interesting. I was, into the product management space for a very long time. And especially, there's a part of Microsoft called Developer Division. We call it DevDiv at times. I've actually spent like 18 of my, 21 years at Microsoft in DevDiv.
So did you start networking?
No. So I started on a language called Visual J#. I don't know if you remember that one or not.
By the way, it was fantastic. This was Windows... Oh boy, not WCF. There was a framework for developing Windows apps in the second version, which was actually fantastic.
Exactly, and it was, that was the long time back, again, 2000 to 2003 time frame when we were trying to attract all kinds of developers to, .NET, and J# was our language with Java semantics, but, runs on top of the CLR, essentially. So that is the project I started working with. Kind of fast forward couple of years, we kind of had to put it to end of support because, it had run its course. And then I think right about at that point in time, Microsoft was sort of like, hey, we need to start investing into the JavaScript space. We had kind of hit pause on the browser, business and the product for a bit. And, Chrome was starting to, kind of come, and we were like, hey, we need to start doing something in the, JavaScript space. And that's when, I think one of the so the first project ended with J#, and I kind of moved on to the, web space at that point in time. And I kind of moved over to the JavaScript project, and we kind of did this is IE6, IE7, IE8 time frame. Kind of kept working on the web pieces slowly and steadily. I think worked across all parts of the runtime, right from the garbage collectors, the JIT engine, etc. Yeah, it was. I think it was when we were working in IE8, it was just about starting to catch up, and then I think it was post IE8 we suddenly realized Chrome hit the market. We realized the landscape has changed completely, right? And we really need to create a completely new JavaScript engine. So we said, okay, we're going to just give up everything we have. We are going to start afresh. And that's when we built Chakra.
Chakra, right.
Chakra was the engine that powered IE11 and beyond. And, it was so much fun working on a V1 product. Hey, we're not looking at the old code bases. The industry has changed. The landscape has changed.
This occurred through DevDiv, not IE, essentially.
That is correct. So I think we kind of kept the developer platform pieces in DevDiv. So, the runtime was in DevDiv. So that happened, that was a phenomenal journey. Then it was, I think as we were kind of working on the whole, the JavaScript runtime, the obvious thing was hey, the browser is one piece, but Node.js started, and there is JavaScript on the back end. So I was very deeply involved with that part of the community as well. And slowly and steadily sort of became Microsoft's representative to the Node.js Foundation board, which later on became the OpenJS Foundation board.
And you're still on?
I actually, just a couple of years back, as I joined the .NET team, I finally asked somebody else to pick up that thing, so that we have a good representation there, because, I'm so stretched for, my time in other places.
Right.
So that was the journey with JavaScript. And then, as things kept growing, with both the browser piece as well as the, backend piece in Node.js, of course, one of the challenges we were running with is the developer productivity pieces with JavaScript were really bad. And that's when TypeScript evolved.
Sure. So you've been kind of revolving around the tiles.
And then it was I think TypeScript at that point in time was about a year into the market. We were starting to solve the right set of problems, but it was still, I would say, I think if I remember correctly, when I joined, we had about 5,000 monthly users or something. So we really had to scale. So I was on the, I also had TypeScript in my portfolio, and we grew it from about 5,000 users to over 1 million users.
Wow.
So that was another amazing part of the journey, working with Anders and, rest of the folks on the team, working with the community, working with the ecosystem, understanding the problems, and of course, TypeScript was also very, very closely aligned with VS Code. So, there was a lot of interaction there. So, I was essentially owning all of the, web pieces, for DevDiv. And then, about 4 to 5 years back, what happened was, we decided, hey, we're going to rewrite we needed to get our act together around our browser story. Right. And there were a lot of conversations, and they were hey, we're going to pull the runtime back into the browser team, and let's go build it that ways. And as a leader, I just felt very odd telling my team, you go there, I stay here. Because, I had a lot of, I had my hands in a lot of different products. And I was I can say Chakra goes there, but it just didn't feel right as a leader. And I said, I'm going to come with you. I'm going to be in that team. We'll set an amazing culture. Wow. One of the biggest things there was, kind of resetting the whole perspective of how you look at and work with open source software. My journey in DevDiv kind of was in the open source world.
You're kind of bookmarking it. It's interesting because your beginning of your career was the Microsoft antagonistic to the open source era, and of course TypeScript and Visual Studio Code, which I think opened the floodgates for that world to Microsoft.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, Chakra was, I would say it was the very first component that ships as part of our operating system in Windows, which we took open source.
Yeah.
Right. So that was also and so I was part of that whole journey. And then, coming to Edge, we decided, hey, we're going to pivot, what we were working on. We're going to go build it on top of Chromium. And I was essentially owning all of the developer pieces. So, in the browser business, you can think of 4 customer areas. There's the consumer, there's the enterprise, there's the developer. And I was solely focused on the developer piece there, whether it's tools, the platform, whether we have the different app models like WebView, PWAs, etc. So that was all that I was doing.
Now, this is, sorry, just to clarify, I guess there are technically 2 Edge eras in a way. So obviously the first part was a continuation of Internet Explorer in some ways.
That's
and then
true.
Eventually we go to Chromium.
That's true.
So you're still referring to the beginning of the Edge?
So I was in the beginning of the Edge when we had the Trident was the rendering engine and Chakra was the backing JavaScript engine. And then the new era, because, I was there like across both the eras, to be honest. But I was part of the browser team when we did the pivot from the old Trident Chakra to the new Chromium-based code base. And, it was a great decision in the end. And then again, the team got to a great place, was there for about 3 years. And this opportunity opened up where, I think Amanda, whom I work for, she reached out and said, like, hey, there's this thing in .NET. And I'm like, I am such a web guy,
I like that there's a thing in .NET.
Yeah. And I'm like, I have never been a .NET guy. And, I'm such a hardcore web person. Of course, I understand the nitty-gritties of developer platforms, of working with developers, runtimes, languages, all of those things. She was like, no, it's going to be great. Just come over. So, and then my journey started with .NET, C++, and all of these technology areas. Sorry, a little long, but I thought
I wanted to hear it. This is a part of Microsoft's history that I experienced firsthand, and am very interested in. And so, in a sense, you are the new Scott Hunter?
I am the new Scott Hunter, yes. Yeah. I think for the last 2.5 years, I am the new Scott Hunters.
Okay. Are you comfortable with that?
I think it is definitely big shoes to fill. Scott has been somebody who worked on the product for, I think, 8 to 10 years, if not longer. Yeah. And, when you work on a given product for such a long time, you know every nitty-gritty of the product, right? Every detail of the product. He's been a great partner in helping me ramp up. And this year, it really felt like, this was the third .NET Conf that happened while I was here, and I was just sharing with somebody, for the first time, it felt like, it was all in all my baby, right from every product detail that we've worked on, the storytelling that we've worked on, every feature we've thought about. Because, a very interesting aspect is as you grow higher and you move teams, you go and suddenly pick up a different technology area. You want to come in and you want to start looking and understanding what's happening before starting to change it. So that was my journey during .NET 7, which is like, hey, I'm soaking it in, but I'm also observing like, hey, where the project is headed, where the product is headed, what customers are saying. And then it was really .NET 8 where we were like, okay, we're going to start making some changes now.
Oh, nice. Okay. Because the .NET today is very different from the .NET that started in 2001 or 2002.
That's true.
Whenever that was. And I said this to Amanda the other day. To me, this is the best of Microsoft. Mm-hmm. That transformation to embracing open source, for lack of a better term, or and taking it cross platform and engaging with the community, which I think is maybe the best part about it.
Absolutely.
I would say of all the parts of Microsoft that I write about, I have a hard time keeping up with 2 parts, which are .NET and Microsoft 365, and it's because of the sheer volume of information.
That's true.
Which I think is incredible. So there's a wonderful kind of transparency and predictability to the .NET schedule. When you look at a release like .NET 8, you hit these very specific milestones in a very regimental way, and you release in November, and now we go do it again.
That's true.
It's neat. And a lot of the products you mentioned are a little bit like that. Visual Studio Code has that kind of fun schedule where they do the release notes for the previous month every month. But I think that's incredible, and I think that's one of the neat things about .NET today. And when I looked at the keynote the other day, some of the groups were talking about how they delivered more than they expected to. All right, because you have the schedule, but you've got community contributions coming in, and it makes the product better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's I think I would say that is one of the the best aspects of being in the open is you not only bring along the community, but even a whole lot of our partners, right? Because when partners come to us and say like, hey, we have some requirement, can you do this? There's always that constraint of like, you have X number of people, Y number of months, and you need to hit quality. And playing in the open, enables you to bring others to help contribute. And that is one of the biggest things. Like, when we were just kind of collecting the statistics for .NET All Up, we kind of observed like over 50,000 people have contributed to .NET till date, which is like just an amazing and humbling number to see.
Yeah, so it's not just, it's that. There's this community. It's not only Windows anymore. It's going out, to the world, basically. It's everywhere.
Yes.
.NET has grown since .NET Core and its transition into .NET to encompass so many different, I guess, workloads, for lack of a better term. The capabilities have almost exponentially expanded. It's incredible. Yeah. So you know Richard Campbell.
Yes,
right?
I do.
So I've asked him this question. I mean, we've been friends for a long time. We were on a trip at one point, and I said, "Hey, what's your elevator pitch for .NET? How do you explain .NET to someone on the outside in a way that makes sense quickly, I guess?"
Yeah. So I think the way I would put it is like, we want to .NET is a very strategic platform for us at Microsoft. A lot of our own technology, our own services, they're all built on top of .NET. It's kind of geared for high scale, high availability. For everybody else, regardless of what application you want to build, our goal with .NET is really to build a unified development platform that developers love and enterprises trust. That's my punchline that I lead with all the time. Like, it's a single platform. You do not need to go learn anything else to go build any kind of app that you really want. Whether you're building for the cloud, whether you're building for the web, whether you're building for clients like, the desktop, the mobile, whether you want to infuse AI into your apps, whether you're building games, you can build any kind of application using, one language, one runtime. So that's the elevator pitch for me, which is like, it's the unification aspect that brings the value add. And then, of course, we want to make sure that year after year, release after release, we are focused on three things. One is making sure that .NET has the best fundamentals in the industry, which includes performance, security, etc. Right. Second, it's the best platform for all the modern workloads, as we were just talking about. And then the third thing is, like, it provides the best developer productivity. We are always working towards making sure that, hey, when you pick up any of the development tools across the Visual Studio family of products, whether it's VS Code, developers have the highest productivity when building .NET applications. So those are the three things. A little longer than elevator pitch, but at the end of the day, what we are really looking for is that developer love and enterprise trust.
So, I mean, given how diverse the .NET ecosystem is, I assume there's no way to describe quickly the typical customer, because there is no typical customer as far as the developers or companies that are using .NET, right? It must span.
It's a very broad span. We see people who are picking up .NET for all the way from like one part of their application, like people do web front ends with .NET backends, right. APIs, Microsoft. Like, there is a whole plethora of the customer base, and it's very, very varied.
Yeah, there are a lot of interesting things in the way that .NET has changed, but you're on an annual schedule, and I know there's the LTS, non-LTS releases every other year. Back in the day, .NET was something that was included with Windows. It shipped in that kind of 10-year support life cycle, so this is very different. And I know that just at a very basic level, one of the reasons someone might upgrade their app to a new version of .NET is always going to be the performance gains. It seems like every year there's something pretty incredible happening there.
That's true.
And obviously there are new capabilities if you want to expand the app and so forth. But has there been any friction with that kind of a thing as far as the user base? Or
I think there's not been a friction with the user base. First of all, I think I would say, like, if you have to be a modern open source development platform today, you have to be super agile.
Right.
And a lot of developers understand that aspect, that, hey, we want you to be innovating at a very rapid pace. Now, of course, there are enterprises, there are customers who are always looking for, like, hey, 3 years is not enough of a time frame for me to support something. Like, can you offer us longer support? But at the same time, they also realize that, hey, the landscape shifts very drastically these days from a technology perspective every 3 years. So I would not say there has been zero friction. There has definitely been some friction. We still see some people, who are using the old proprietary .NET framework,
Yes.
Which is still Windows only. And it is absolutely okay to use it, because, if that is what meets your needs, that's the reason we are supporting it, right? Because it has the longer timeline, it is built in. But if you are building something that is more either perf intensive, or you are trying to build for the cloud, these days, in the last 1 year, there has just been such a magnificent outpour of, like, generative AI everywhere, right? And suddenly, like, we need to build those new technologies into the platform. And I think at times, like, oh boy, if we were still tied to Windows, just imagine how long it would have taken us
Right.
to build something in and then ship it out.
And it's gotten easier over the years to upgrade from legacy .NET versions to new .NET versions. And
Yes.
I assume going from version to version now is...
Yes, no, absolutely. And that's one of the other top of minds for us. And we have actually built a bunch of tooling around this for customers. Like, we have what we call the .NET Upgrade Assistant.
Right.
It ships both as part of, like, as a Visual Studio extension, as well as a CLI tool. And what it enables people to do is, like, migrate their workloads forward, whether they are on framework to, .NET, which is like .NET Core, or from an older version of Core to the latest version of Core. Because I think that's one of the biggest things that we hear from people is, how do we ease their migration? How can we ease their pain? The other thing is, like, year after year, we are also becoming better in making sure that there are fewer and fewer breaking changes in the platform. Because, that's one of the other pieces is, like, hey, you will only break the customer if there are breaking changes. As long as you have a restricted set, it is very well documented, customers find it very easy.
Right.
And then lastly, in this whole area, in terms of migration, the other thing is, some customers do come to us and talk to us about, like, hey, I have this legacy application, I'm probably just going to rewrite it into a new one. But at the same time, I want to, kind of move this application from on-prem to the cloud. And could you help? And we are currently working on a set of tooling around that as well, which can help, you just lift and shift your existing apps into the cloud.
Right.
And then over a period of time, you essentially modernize your applications, or, create net new pieces which are more cloud ready for today's modern world.
Okay. Almost a cloud upgrade assistant.
Exactly,
or
exactly.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you mentioned AI, and this year has been AI. I mean, what's as of today, because this is obviously going to change rapidly, but what's the AI story for the .NET developer?
Yeah.
It's probably not simple.
It's a great question. I think so. The great thing about .NET is we were investing in the AI space almost all the way back since 2018, with a technology called ML.NET. Now we go back and say, like, at times we make fun of ourselves, like we should have called it AI.NET rather than ML.NET. So we've been investing in this space, and, we have been very rapidly partnering with the ecosystem, as well as looking at all the changes, across the whole AI space, to make sure that .NET is really ready to meet developers' needs for the AI workload. And this kind of falls, there are multiple pieces in the spectrum. So if you look at the runtime, in .NET 8, we've done a bunch of stuff in terms of, like, system numerics, bringing tensor primitives in. So, the core fundamentals that are supported by the runtime, we've kind of made sure that we are bringing in the right elements. The second big piece is, when you think about large language models, working with, the semantic kernel team to make sure that the .NET SDK looks and feel very idiomatic to .NET developers. The third thing is when I think about services like Azure OpenAI, and Azure Cognitive Services and such, they all have great .NET SDKs available. And then finally, like the ecosystem outside of Microsoft as well is evolving so rapidly. Like, there are new vector databases, just as an example, Milvus, Quadrant. So we've been working with those partners to say like, hey, you should have a great first-class experience for .NET developers there. So both Quadrant and Milvus very recently in the last, within the last month, they kind of landed their support for C# based SDK. So our goal really is to make sure to, stay caught up with how rapidly the industry is evolving around AI, bring what is required into the core platform, work with the ecosystem to make sure .NET has, the right set of levers that developers could use, as well as work with the open source projects out there to provide and bring .NET support there. So those are the three pieces that I would say we've been focused on.
From kind of a tools perspective, I'm not a professional developer in any way, shape, or form, but I came up in the world of Visual Studio in the very late 90s. And the shift to, it's not really a shift, the addition of Visual Studio Code is very interesting to me. And I actually use this tool all the time. I use it to write, not to write code so much, although I do that as well. I was fascinated this year to see things like the C# Dev Kit occur, .NET MAUI support in that editor. What's driving this change? I mean, it might seem a little off-putting to a traditional C or a Visual Studio-based developer, but this is a brand new world. This was already a brand new world. Now it seems, once again, it's expanding very dramatically.
Yeah. No, that's such a great question. So, if I kind of talk about our tooling story, right, all up, the thing I would say is Visual Studio remains to be our premier tool for .NET developers. That's where they will find the most amount of productivity benefits that you can get would always be in Visual Studio. With that said, one of the things that we were seeing in the industry is like when you think about learners, new people coming in, there are a lot more people who were obviously going to a lightweight editor in VS Code, and we did not even have any offering for those people to say like, hey, how you want to get started, you just want to try something out, how do you get started? And there was that piece that was missing, which is like, hey, you have zero support there. And that's one of the big pieces which kind of got us, hey, we need to make sure that we really are listening to all the developers and catering to their needs. And, we talked to a lot of people who were just getting started, and everybody was like, I wish you had support in VS Code. Because, that's the thing I'm using, whether I'm trying to learn JavaScript, trying to learn Python, and that's where I would want to be. So that inspired us to make sure that we start taking a look at bringing amazing C#, editing experiences in VS Code. And then as we were doing that project, there were some obvious other opportunities, with MAUI, which is an upcoming workload, with Unity, which is, a gaming workload, to say like, hey, most of those developers are there. The other thing I would say is when we were talking to enterprises, enterprises also had this very interesting aspect of like, hey, I either have .NET developers or I have these polyglot developers. .NET developers are very happy with VS. But, these polyglot developers who work in more than one language, essentially, they tend to prefer VS Code. And, we are forcing them to kind of switch between these two.
Right.
So it was essentially kind of thinking about that, the learner category, as well as like listening to the needs of the enterprise, where people are doing both, to say like, hey, let's just go and deliver the right experiences they need across both the tools in that case.
So I mean, you have a web dev background. I assume Visual Studio Code to you was very
It feels like home.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I had a hard time adapting to it.
Yeah.
I love it now. I mean, okay, I don't want to ask you any, I don't mean to pry about future things, but I assume there'll be further workloads isn't the right term, but I guess extensions, essentially, that will extend the capabilities there. There was, the C# dev kit has that Visual Studio project compatibility, which is really interesting. And I assume that was driven by a need to integrate outside developers into an enterprise. That maybe some developers are working on a bigger project in
That's correct.
Full Visual Studio.
That's correct. Because I think, that is coming from that enterprise perspective that I was talking to you about, which is like, in a given enterprise, there are people who are working on the same code base from VS Code as well as Visual Studio. And that was one of the biggest pieces of feedback we heard is like, hey, help us see that solution level view. VS Code does a great job, but it provides you a file level view, so to speak, or a folder view of your code base. And, a lot of .NET developers are used to seeing that project view. And that's why, so that particular aspect was really catering to the, requirements coming from the enterprise side as we went and talked to people.
Interesting. So I want to be respectful of your time, but we have to talk about .NET 8 a little bit.
Sure.
Please. Obviously, this is a huge release, LTS, et cetera. What's your favorite or best new features or capabilities in this release?
So I think super happy about all of the work that has gone into .NET 8. If I was to talk about my top 3, I think I would say the fact I feel really happy that .NET 8 is the fastest .NET ever, and I just don't say it from the perspective of like measuring benchmarks, etc. But there's just so much enhancements that we have driven into the platform that we are seeing a lot of improvements for almost all real world workloads, if I was to call them that. So first is that. I think the second one I would say is really best in class platform as well as tools to build intelligent cloud native apps. And one of the biggest things there is, of course, this is when you say intelligent cloud native, there are just like, wow, too many words. They mean so many different things to so many different people. But, a few things there. If you think about today's industry, containers are like sort of the currency of compute. And we've done a ton of work in terms of improving the containerization story with .NET. We've hardened it, non-root images, non-admin users.
Too. They're smaller and
they are way smaller in their size. We kind of drove, kind of like the tiniest images are now built using something called native AOT, which is ahead of time compilation. And that essentially is, when people come and ask me, I was like, hey, think about it. Like you could have run 5 to 6 instances on a given set of compute. And now, with the tiny sizes, you can run 15 to 20 instances. And if you can achieve what you want with that density saving, that's a very big win. The third thing in that area was, of course, like, this release, we worked with a lot of internal teams to understand what are the basic requirements that almost every team was using but was not built into the platform. So, a lot of things around observability, health checks, metrics, resiliency they have now become, part of the core platform itself. But the biggest thing for me was launching .NET Aspire.
Okay, I was wondering if you were going to
say.
That was a surprise, wasn't it?
It was a surprise. It is .NET Aspire is our opinionated, cloud-ready stack for building, observable, resilient, high availability, cloud-native applications. It was a surprise because, it was a journey we were on. We were working with so many internal partners. We were not really sure, like, hey, is it going to be ready in time? Like, are there other pieces? And we really wanted to make sure that when we come out with the story has to be coherent, right? Like, it has to all come together. And there are really 3 core pieces that we thought through. One is, it has to be easy for people to get started, whether it is day 1 or day 100. The second thing was that developer inner loop, when you're building those applications, how do we really drive and make sure that becomes extremely simple for people? And then the third thing for me was like, hey, how do we make it way more easier to deploy to the cloud? Because even though like the inner loop, the getting started gets easier, that deployment to the code piece is a very tough piece today for developers. Most of the demos I end up seeing is like people end at the inner dev loop. And we kept challenging ourselves like, hey, how can we go simplify those pieces? So that to me is the biggest new release. Like, I kind of called it out almost at the end because, it's still in a preview state. Like we just launched the preview of it, even though almost all of the elements that it is built on top of are part of the .NET 8 runtime. And then I think So the first one was performance. The second was like, best platform and tools for intelligent cloud native apps. And then the third piece for me is really like all of the developer productivity enhancements, capability enhancements across the rest of the stack. Whether you're building for web, there's tons of new features and, a technology called Blazor that we did. With Movi, which is our workload for, mobile developers. So much of quality and stability. Like, the focus was not on new capabilities, but really it was on, quality and stability. Because when you launch a new platform, you need to give time to the ecosystem to come up and stand along with you. Right. So those would be the three, Paul, I would say.
Okay. Three of the, I don't know what it was, 150 or more.
It's a huge platform, right?
Yeah.
I can go and touch on anything. Like, I didn't even talk about the language piece, but
C# language improvements. It goes on and on. But,
correct.
No, I like I said, it's hard to keep up with .NET, and it's funny because every milestone, every beta, every release candidate, every team has its own ginormous post about all the changes. It's amazing. It's astonishing watching this thing evolve. It's just really impressive.
Yeah, no, and it is really awesome to see, like, I think the developer love that we see release after release, with the improvements. And, what gives us really a kick is when developers come and share their own stories with us. Like, we have on our blog, we kind of started this series about like, hey, we want to bring and publish people's own stories on our blog. Like, hey, are they actually benefiting as they upgrade? Right. Like, what are the changes they're seeing? And those, give you so much of energy and keep you motivated of keep going.
Right, that's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was very nice to meet you and to speak with you today. Congratulations on .NET, also .NET Conf.
Yeah, no, and thank you so much, Paul. It was a pleasure to come here and meet you. I think this is the first time I'm meeting you in person, so yes. It was an absolute pleasure, sir.
Thank you.